sister is getting married and she asked me to sew her the wedding gown. Pretty much believes in me and that I can make it happen even though I've never sewn a dress of this caliber before. We both decided that it would be best for her to visit various wedding salons, try on the dresses, and see what she likes most. A corset top with a straight neckline and narrow shoulder straps, an open back, a fitted column skirt, and a very voluminous overskirt. She really likes the Lazaro gown, especially the silhouette. However, the various details of her dream dress, particularly the corset, have been pulled from other inspirations. Pretty much a juxtaposition between a Rococo-like overskirt, volume and shape-wise, and a modern dress underneath. We also wanted the dress to be timeless, structural, and very New York, because New York is my sister's home. I am using the fashion sketch to create the very first mock-up of the wedding gown, which at this point is the corselette, and the understructure, what pretty much the entire wedding gown is going to be held up by, so it's a very important part of the dress, probably the most important part, even though it's not going to be seen. I have not yet figured out how it'll function because the actual wedding gown top will be a corset in itself, and there are multiple ways I can approach to get the desired look. It's just a matter of experimenting. The main goal here is to create a top which will fit her beautifully and give me something to go off of when I see her. So then I'm gonna have to bring in this area. My sister flew in for the very first fitting. At this point, we're about a year away from the wedding and I felt more than confident that there's enough time. It's never enough. Thankfully, she was in town for a few weeks, so not only did it give me time to adjust the very first corset, but to create the bottom skirt portion of the dress, which I made 2 of, and adjusted the corset to hopefully fit her better. Some of the changes made is a smoother transition from the edge of the corset panel onto the strap. This area over here. Currently the two do not match because I was still figuring out how to go about it. I've also made the overall adjustments to the corset, and at this time something still felt off to me, especially the back. We wanted the back to be more open and have more of this rectangular shape based on the samples that she provided. But with further adjustments and markings made to the corset, it gave me the confidence that everything might turn out just fine. Too tight? Yeah. I made 4 more mock-ups of the corset top, and here are all of them. Corset number 1, which is falling apart. Corset number 2, which is very similar to corset number 1. Thanks to my friend Anastasia, who's very knowledgeable. She adjusted a few panels, and then using her approach I was able to make further adjustments where I felt it was needed, so thank you so much. Corset number 3, which is sewn out of Dutch silk satin and the fabric that is going to be used on the gown itself. I've never sewn out of this fabric before, so I wanted to experiment how to go about it. Pretty much test the material. It has cotton couture as the backing. The channels are not visible on the front, which I'm very happy about because it feels a little too busy for me. And then on the back, I've added the channels onto the seam lines over here. And on this side, I've experimented and added the channels to the side of the seam lines. Corset number 4, there's actually 5 samples altogether. This is where I've realized that the corset is going to be made out of 2 different parts. We will have the corselette, and then there will be the corset top. Corselette number 5, which is actually the corselette, and this is the perfect fit. Both of the seam lines will be pressed to the side and the boning channel will be sewn on top like so. Okay, let's get going. So the next part we need to tackle is the overskirt, which at this point is the petticoat, or the understructure that will give the piece an incredible puff. I am couture obsessed. Particularly the construction of it all, not buying expensive garments. Everything about the dress. I want to apply the techniques they use in fashion houses as much as possible, and so I'm using what I was taught in college by Lynda Maynard, along with referring to the Couture Sewing Technique book by Shaeffer, and researching and studying the methods used in Dior and Chanel Atelier. And so here it is, the very first layer of the horizontal panels of silk chiffon, 2 layers to be exact. I've measured the distance from the waist to the floor on the dress form, divided the number by how many panels I would like, and used that information to figure out the length of each panel, which varied from the shortest on top, and the length of each panel would gradually increase as it moved down. Like, regardless of whether or not the piece will be visible, I wanted to sew as neatly as possible because you still see it. If you sew it, you see it, even if it's behind layers and layers of fashion fabric. Now, onto the horsehair braid. I am using a 2-inch wide braid, which will be sewn along the horizontal seam lines and the hemline to help the skirt stand on its own. The second part was to create the flounces, which is basically the layers that will be sitting on top of the paneled silk petticoat. A large amount of cotton organdy fabric cut to make circular panels of various diameters and lengths. Which are then sewn together on a straight line. Panels of them, much like the previous skirt, but layered as well, and it gives this fully humanist effect. It's so awesome. And then you add where you want the volume to be, so there's no right or wrong answer, it's just a matter of taste and preference. This is just the beginning. I've been adding more and more tulle and flounces as the dress progressed, and we wanted more and more and more volume. This is lovely Anastasia. She helped me figure out how to eventually pattern the actual overskirt. I've never created one before or sewn a dress of this caliber, but with her guidance in terms of how to lay out the panels, where to stitch and create the pleats along the waistline for a seamless look, really helped. So thank you so much.
А ты в любую, она ж там у тебя сборка будет. Но зато и ткани, и зато здесь вот оно ложится хорошо.
I've ordered cotton bobinette, which is this lightweight but very strong tulle fabric. Back during the couture class in San Francisco, I remember Lynda mentioning how amazing the fabric is, and that it's been used in couture houses throughout history and still is being used. So here we are. Carefully thread tracing the corselette panels on straight of grain. Using tissue paper underneath would have helped with stabilization. Unfortunately, I've only thought about that later. Cut everything out, adding a wide seam allowance per usual. And so with little information that is provided online, I was able to study Dior examples and found that a second layer of panels are needed, which are placed on cross grain and thread traced along with the previous pattern pieces for strength and some give at the same time. Why is it that everything that is old and vintage is of such good quality? Can someone please bring this approach to production back? The panels are now ready to be hand basted. I'm using cotton thread for basting, mostly because I find that it's easy on the fabric and not terribly strong, so it's also easy to remove when it's time to do so. Make sure that every panel is sewn in one direction, so if you start from the top going down, do so on every single panel of the corselette because it prevents pulling. And then when boning channels are ready to be sewn along the vertical seams, pirouche ribbon is sewn on top of the waistline, meaning the top edge of the ribbon should run along the waistline. But then how do we sew that perfect boning channel? First, we need bias tape, obviously, which you can make yourself, and I am using silk charmeuse to do so. It's not very easy, but the bias tape turns out to be so pretty. Or you can purchase a roll online. Next, we need to carefully mark the panel and cut around each seam allowance. Stay stitch along the neckline to prevent stretching, and baste the panel to the rest of the corset. And then machine stitch. Remove basting thread, press the seam allowance to one side. Trim and grade the seam allowance. Clip seam allowance diagonally to avoid weak points. Lay out the bias tape over the seam allowance along the edge of the actual seam line, and now neatly baste the tape along one side, and then the other. You will use this basting thread as the guide to machine sew the channels on the side of the corset which is most visible. The width of the channels should be 2 mm wider than the bones. Remove basting thread, inspect, add beautiful lace trimming if needed for aesthetic purposes, and to hide imperfections. Insert that spiral boning, and here we are. A few more panels and the corselette is complete. Well, almost. So I've made a corselette back in college. I only have like one sample and not a lot of experience, but I think I kind of remember how to do the closures in the back. Hold on a second. I'm gonna use this as the guide over here. There we go. We're gonna do hook and eye tape. I'm just gonna study regards to what's been done here and apply it to there. I think it's a lot of hand sewing. Cutting out a strip of organza stabilizer on a straight of grain. You should probably always use a stabilizer on zippers and buttons and stuff. Align it centered along the back edge of the corset. Baste as usual, machine stitch. Press the seam allowance in. Then I hit the raw edge on the top of the back panel with the bias strip to keep things pretty. With tiny invisible stitches, the tape with the hooks is neatly hand sewn on top, like so, along the edge. On both edges, actually. Similarly to how the Handbook zipper is sewn with those tiny and pretty much invisible stitches going down. On the other back panel, you want to fold the seam allowance and the eyelet tape will sandwich the edge, which you also want to stabilize and sew through all the layers with yet another strong invisible stitch. Make sure that the thread is strong and that the stitches are small and close together, because there will be a lot of tension in that part of the corset. Like, you don't really want the corset to come apart. That's going to be horrible. And now we want to insert the boning, which I'm using spiral steel boning because of its malleability, strength, and because this is what is usually used in couture. And make sure that the bone does not fall past 1/8 of an inch on top and bottom part of the channel. There needs to be some space to prevent fabric from tearing, and then the edges are secured with tip covers using clippers. Or pliers. Once we have all of the boning, it is time to baste around the hemline of the corselette. Bear with me for 1 second. We need lace. Delicate and conspicuous lace trimming. This one should work. I don't have a lot of it, but what I do have is very beautiful and was graciously gifted by a family friend. Also natural fibers. I've tested. The lace is now hand sewn onto the bottom edge of the corselette to finish off the hemline of the garment. As you can see, the bottom edge is folded up toward the front of the corselette, and then the lace trimming is carefully hand sewn on top, hiding the raw edge of the bobbinette with tiny stitches. And then we lost the light, but here she is, flipped inside out for the moment to demonstrate all of the hard work.